For 22 years, Tom Barrett's neighbors called him that poor man. The broken father who refused to accept his daughter was gone. They pitied his map-covered walls, his endless flyers, his refusal to pack away Emily's bedroom. They whispered about obsession when he lost his job, his wife, nearly his sanity, all to chase shadows of a 15-year-old girl who vanished from a county fair. But on a cold Michigan evening in 2017, as Tom's trembling finger scrolled through Facebook suggestions, the universe finally blinked. There she was, Emily, unmistakable despite the decades, standing beside a stranger named Victor Reed with empty eyes and a smile that screamed silently for help. In that moment, the crazy man became the only sane person in a world that had given up too soon, and the desperate search that cost him everything suddenly became the only thing that mattered. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. Summer drifted across Mapleton, Michigan like a gentle sigh. The Barrett family home stood like any other on Willow Street, a two-story colonial with fading blue paint and a front porch that creaked with stories. Inside lived Tom and Lisa Barrett and their two children, 15-year-old Emily and 9-year-old Kyle. Tom Barrett stood in the kitchen doorway, watching his daughter hunched over the dining table. Emily's auburn hair fell across her face as she sorted through photographs she'd taken with the camera he'd given her for her birthday 3 months ago. "These are really good, Em," Tom said, picking up a black and white shot of the old covered bridge at Wilson Creek. The composition was striking, morning fog clinging to the wooden beams, a sense of mystery in the shadows. Emily looked up, a flush of pride on her freckled cheeks. "You think so? Mrs. Pearson says I could enter some in the county art show next month." "She's right," Tom nodded, settling into the chair beside her. At 42, Tom had the weathered hands of a man who'd spent 20 years at the local furniture factory. He'd never been anywhere outside of Michigan, but Emily, she was different. She had vision. "You've got a real eye for this." Lisa appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dishcloth. At 39, she still had the warm beauty that had first caught Tom's attention at a high school football game all those years ago. "Dinner in 10 minutes, she announced, resting a hand on Emily's shoulder. "Your brother's upstairs if you could call him down." "He's probably building another fortress." Emily rolled her eyes, but there was affection in her voice. She gathered her photos carefully, placing them in a folder. Tom watched her movements. So adult-like already. When had his little girl started growing up? Just last week she'd asked about art camps in Chicago for next summer. The thought of her leaving, even temporarily, had created a knot in his stomach he couldn't quite explain. The telephone rang, cutting through his thoughts. Lisa answered, her voice brightening. "Hi, Rachel. Yes, she's right here." Emily took the receiver, twirling the cord around her finger. "Hey, are you still going to the fair Saturday? My parents said I could go." Rachel Williams had been Emily's best friend since 3rd grade. The two were inseparable, Rachel with her bold personality balancing Emily's quieter nature. Later that evening, after Kyle had been tucked into bed with promises of baseball practice, tomorrow, Emily approached her parents in the living room. Tom was reading the newspaper while Lisa folded laundry, the television murmuring in the background. "So, about Saturday," Emily began, perching on the arm of the sofa. "Rachel's mom can drop us off, but could you pick us up around 10? Lisa exchanged a glance with Tom. 10 is pretty late, honey. Please, everyone from school will be there. It's the last weekend before they take everything down." Emily's eyes were bright with anticipation. "I promise I'll stay with Rachel the whole time." Tom folded his newspaper. "You know, your mother and I were thinking of going too. We could all—" "Dad." Emily's voice held that particular teenage exasperation that had become more common lately. "I'm 15. I don't need my parents following me around." Tom felt that familiar tug, the need to protect warring with the necessity of letting go. Lisa caught his eye, giving him a subtle nod. "All right," he relented. "But you call us if you need anything. I mean it, and no going off with anyone else." Emily's face broke into a wide smile. "Thank you," She hugged them both quickly before heading upstairs, her footsteps light with excitement. "She'll be fine," Lisa said later as they prepared for bed. "We can't keep her in a bubble forever." "I know," Tom sighed. "Just seems like yesterday she was Kyle's age." The week passed in ordinary fashion. Wednesday evening, Emily came home unsettled, though she brushed it off when Lisa noticed. "Everything okay?" Lisa asked, watching her daughter dump her backpack by the stairs. "Yeah," Emily shrugged. "Just some creep in a blue van. He was parked outside school, then I noticed him following a few blocks behind me." Tom had been in the living room but was at her side in an instant. "What? Did you get a license plate? Did you see who was driving?" "Dad, it's fine," Emily insisted. "He drove off when I went into Miller's drugstore. It was probably nothing." But Tom called the police anyway. Officer Dawson took the information but didn't seem overly concerned. "Lots of blue vans in town, Mr. Barrett, but we'll keep an eye out." By Saturday, the incident seemed forgotten. Emily spent the morning developing photos in the makeshift darkroom Tom had helped her set up in the basement. At 6 o'clock, she emerged in jeans and her favorite denim jacket, hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Rachel's mom is here," she announced, slinging her small backpack over her shoulder. Inside was her point-and-shoot camera, not her good one, but perfect for capturing fair memories. 10 o'clock, Lisa reminded her, "and call if you need us earlier." "I will," Emily promised, hugging them both. At the door, she turned back. "Love you guys." Kyle, sitting cross-legged before the TV with a bowl of popcorn, didn't look up from his cartoon. "Bring me back cotton candy." Those were the last words spoken to Emily Barrett before she vanished. The call came at 11:15 p.m. Tom had been pacing since 10:30, while Lisa kept assuring him the teenagers lost track of time. "Mr. Barrett?" Rachel's voice was shaking. "Is Emily home? She never met up with me at the Ferris wheel like we planned." Tom felt the world tilt beneath him. "What do you mean? She went with you?" "No, sir," Rachel's voice cracked. "I was supposed to meet her there. My mom dropped me off at 7. Emily texted me she was coming with Josie instead." Tom's hand tightened around the phone. "Who's Josie?" A pause. "I don't know anyone named Josie." The next hours dissolved into chaos. Tom and Lisa raced to the fairgrounds, which were already shutting down for the night. Security guards and remaining staff joined the increasingly frantic search. Police were called. Emily's photo, one Tom had taken just last month on the front porch, was distributed to officers. By morning, the entire town knew Emily Barrett was missing. Volunteers combed every inch of the fairgrounds and surrounding areas. Emily's face appeared on local news, then state news. Search dogs tracked her scent from the fair entrance to the parking lot, where it disappeared. She got into a vehicle. Officer Dawson, now leading the investigation, told them grimly. 3 days later, they arrested Wesley Grant, a drifter who'd been working at one of the fair booths. He had a record of petty theft and one dismissed assault charge. He'd also been seen talking to several teenage girls at the fair. Tom watched through the two-way mirror as police interrogated him for hours. But Wesley's confusion seemed genuine, and he had an alibi for the critical time window. He'd been helping dismantle a ride, witnessed by 4 co-workers. On day 21, a postcard arrived. Plain, white, drugstore variety. The message was composed of letters cut from magazines. "She's safe. She's mine now. Stop looking." Lisa collapsed when she saw it. Tom held the postcard with trembling hands as police bagged it for evidence. But it yielded nothing. No fingerprints, no distinctive markers, no postmark that narrowed the location beyond northern Michigan. As weeks turned to months, the searches grew smaller. The news stories moved from the front page to brief mentions. People stopped calling. The police file remained open but inactive, a cold case with no leads. Lisa withdrew into herself, spending days in Emily's untouched bedroom. Tom took a leave of absence from work that gradually became permanent. They moved through their home, like ghosts, while Kyle, confused and frightened, tried to make himself invisible. Emily Barrett had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions that echoed through empty rooms. The Barrett house transformed in the years following Emily's disappearance. What was once a home became a shrine to absence, each room haunted by what might have been. Tom converted the guest bedroom into what Lisa bitterly called the obsession room. Maps covered the walls, red pins marking possible sightings, yellow ones identifying where similar abductions had occurred. Bankers' boxes lined the floor, stuffed, with police reports Tom had fought to obtain, newspaper clippings, and printouts of online forums discussing Emily's case. By 1997, Lisa couldn't bear it anymore. Tom found her sitting on their bed one Tuesday afternoon, a small suitcase beside her. "I can't live with a ghost anymore, Tom," she said, her voice hollow. "You're not even here. You're somewhere in those files, those theories." "She's out there," Tom insisted, his voice cracking. "Someone took our daughter, and they're out there living their life while it's killing us." Lisa cried. "Look at Kyle. He's 12 now, and he's growing up in a mausoleum. He needs at least one parent who's actually present." Tom knew she was right about Kyle. The boy had grown quiet, watchful, as if afraid to make any noise in a house, shrouded in grief. His grades had slipped, and twice the school counselor had called about his tendency to sit alone, declining invitations to birthday parties or after-school activities. "I need some time," Lisa finally said. "My sister said I could stay with her in Grand Rapids. Kyle, too, just until—" She didn't finish the sentence. Until what? Until Emily was found? Until Tom stopped searching? Until the pain became bearable? They separated that spring. By Christmas, divorce papers arrived alongside holiday cards from distant relatives who didn't know what to say anymore. Tom sold the furniture factory stock he'd accumulated over 20 years and hired a series of private investigators. Each, one brought temporary hope that disintegrated into disappointment. First was James Holloway, who claimed connections to specialized search teams. $5,000 later, he presented Tom with evidence that Emily had been trafficked to Canada, evidence that turned out to be fabricated when Tom drove to Toronto himself to verify it. Then came Diana West, a self-proclaimed psychic, who took $8,000 to lead Tom through 3 states following Emily's energy. She disappeared after Tom questioned her methods. By 2001, the Barrett house had fallen into disrepair. The yard, once Lisa's pride, grew wild. Paint peeled from the siding. Inside, Tom lived among his files, surviving on part-time work as a night security guard that gave him days free to continue his search. Kyle graduated high school in 2004. Without Tom present, he'd followed a lead to Pennsylvania that day, certain that a girl spotted at a mall might be Emily. It wasn't. When he returned 3 days later, Kyle's graduation cap and gown hung on the banister, but his room was emptied of personal belongings. He enlisted, Lisa told him by phone, her voice tight with anger. "Army. He leaves for basic training tomorrow." "He didn't even say goodbye," Tom whispered. "Would you have noticed if he had?" Lisa replied before hanging up. In 2007, a woman was discovered in Nebraska who claimed to be Amber Swanson, a girl who had disappeared from her Iowa hometown in 1996. For 3 delirious days, Tom allowed himself to hope that such recoveries were possible. Then DNA confirmed the woman was neither Amber Swanson nor Emily Barrett, but a troubled young woman named Denise Franklin with a history of identity disorders. Tom's obsession found new life with the rise of social media and true crime forums. In 2010, he started a blog called Finding Emily, documenting his ongoing search. He posted every photo he had of Emily, described her distinctive freckle pattern, the small scar on her left elbow from falling off a bike at age 7, her love of photography. A small but dedicated community formed around the blog, mostly true crime enthusiasts, but occasionally parents of other missing children who understood the particular hell Tom inhabited. One evening in 2015, his doorbell rang, a rare occurrence that startled him from his computer. On the porch stood a woman in her mid-30s with familiar eyes. "Mr. Barrett," she said hesitantly. "It's Rachel. Rachel Williams." Tom barely recognized Emily's childhood best friend in the poised woman before him. She worked as a social worker now, she explained as they sat awkwardly in his cluttered living room. She'd moved back to Mapleton to care for her aging parents and had seen his blog, "I've felt guilty for so long," Rachel confessed, twisting a tissue in her hands. "If I'd just gone to pick her up that night instead of meeting at the fair." Tom shook his head. "We all have those thoughts. The if-onlys will drive you mad." Rachel visited regularly after that, bringing casseroles and helping Tom organize his increasingly chaotic files. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of Emily's belongings, she found something that made her gasp. "Mr. Barrett, did you ever develop these?" She held up a small plastic container of undeveloped film rolls. I thought we got them all," Tom said, taking the container with shaking hands. "These must have been in her desk." They took them to a specialty shop in Grand Rapids that still processed film. 3 days later, Tom spread the photographs across his kitchen table, his heart in his throat. Most were typical teenage snapshots: Emily and Rachel making silly faces, Kyle playing baseball, shots of their house and garden. But one roll was different. The images were all taken from slightly odd angles, as if shot quickly or secretly. All showed the same thing: a man in the background, at the school fence, across the street from their house, at the edge of the park where Emily sometimes took pictures of birds. These aren't taken by Emily, Tom realized, his blood running cold. These are taken of Emily, by someone else. Rachel stared at the photos. The blue van. She mentioned it. Once, remember, someone following her? The discovery breathed new fire into Tom's search, but ultimately led nowhere. The man's face was never clearly visible, always turned away or in shadow. Police added the photos to Emily's file, but had no way to identify the figure. By early 2017, Tom's health was failing. Years of stress and poor self-care had left him with high blood pressure and the beginning stages of heart disease. His doctor warned him bluntly, "Change or die." For the first time, Tom considered letting go, not of Emily, never of Emily, but of the active search that had consumed half his life. He even contacted a realtor about selling the house. "Dad, are you sure?" Kyle asked during one of their rare phone calls. At 31, he was now a career military man stationed in Colorado, married with a toddler son Tom had never met. "I thought, maybe I'd move closer to you," Tom admitted. "Meet my grandson." The realtor suggested he modernize his online presence to help sell the house. Reluctantly, Tom created a Facebook account, fumbling through the setup process. He added a profile picture, a recent one taken by Rachel that showed his now gray hair and the deep lines around his eyes. 2 days later, scrolling through the "People You May Know" suggestions Facebook had generated, Tom froze. There, on his screen, was a profile for Victor Reed. And in Victor's profile picture stood a woman with auburn hair and a familiar face that had haunted Tom's dreams for 22 years. His daughter, Emily. Alive. Tom's hands trembled so badly he nearly dropped his laptop. The profile picture showed a middle-aged man with thinning hair and cold eyes standing next to a woman who, despite being 22 years older, was unmistakably Emily. Her auburn hair was lighter now, her face thinner, but the pattern of freckles across her nose and the shape of her eyes were exactly the same. But it was her smile that sent a chill through Tom's spine. It didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile someone wears when they're being told to smile. With shaking fingers, Tom clicked on Victor Reed's profile. Most of it was private, but several photos were public, including a recent post captioned, "Me and my sweet girl," showing the same forced smile on Emily's face. Victor's arm was wrapped possessively around her shoulders, his fingers digging visibly into her upper arm. Tom's throat tightened. He'd imagined finding Emily thousands of times over the years, following a tip to a distant city, spotting her in a crowd, getting a mysterious phone call. Never once had he imagined discovering her on Facebook, apparently living with her abductor in plain sight. He scrolled through the handful of public posts. Victor didn't share much, but occasionally posted photos of his daughter Emily at various locations, always with that same vacant smile, always with Victor looming beside her. One photo from Christmas showed them in front of a small cabin with snow-covered pines in the background. The location was tagged, "Home Sweet Home, near Riverdale, Idaho." Tom's heart pounded in his ears. He took screenshots of everything, then began searching for information on Victor Reed. The man had a sparse online presence, no LinkedIn profile, no other social media accounts. A public records search showed he'd purchased property in rural Idaho 15 years ago, paid taxes regularly, and had no criminal record. How was this possible? How had this man kept Emily hidden in plain sight for 22 years? Tom picked up his phone with trembling hands and called Rachel. "I found her," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Rachel, I found Emily." Rachel arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing her social worker ID badge. Tom showed her the Facebook profile, the photos, the location tag. "Oh my God," she breathed, her hand covering her mouth. "It's really her." "Tom, we need to call the police." Tom was already dialing the Mapleton Police Department. Officer Dawson had retired years ago, but his replacement, Detective Wilson, had inherited Emily's case and checked in with Tom occasionally. "Detective, I found Emily," Tom said as soon as Wilson answered. "She's alive. She's in Idaho with a man named Victor Reed." There was a long pause on the line. "Mr. Barrett, are you certain? How did you find this information?" "Facebook," Tom replied, aware of how it sounded. "I know it sounds crazy, but I'm looking at her right now. It's her, Detective. I'd know my daughter anywhere." Detective Wilson took the information, promising to contact authorities in Idaho. But his voice held the same skepticism Tom had heard countless times over the years. "Mr. Barrett, I understand this seems promising, but we need to proceed carefully. Social media can be misleading. And even if this woman resembles Emily after 22 years, it's her," Tom insisted. "Look at the photos yourself. I'm sending them now." He hung up and forwarded the screenshots to Wilson's email. Then he began searching for everything he could find on Riverdale, Idaho. It was a tiny town, population 1247 according to the latest census, nestled in a valley, surrounded by dense forest. The nearest city of any size was over 60 miles away, the perfect place to hide. "We need property records," Rachel said, her social worker training kicking in. "If we can pinpoint where he lives." They spent hours searching online databases. Finally, Rachel found it. A property deed for 6 acres of land with a cabin, purchased by Victor Reed in 2002. The address was simply listed as Timber Creek Road, Riverdale, Idaho. Tom called the local police department in Riverdale. The conversation was brief and frustrating. "Sir, I understand your concerns," the officer said after Tom explained the situation. "But these photos alone aren't grounds for a search warrant. The woman appears to be an adult. There's no visible distress or evidence of a crime." "She was kidnapped 22 years ago," Tom shouted. "Which is why I'll send someone to do a welfare check," the officer replied evenly. "But Mr. Barrett, even if this is your daughter, after so much time she's legally an adult now. If she tells officers she's there willingly," Tom slammed the phone down, his entire body shaking. Rachel placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "We need more," she said quietly. "And we need Kyle." Tom hesitated. His relationship with his son had been strained for years. Kyle had made a life for himself far from Mapleton and the shadow of his sister's disappearance. Their conversations, rare as they were, remained surface level and brief. But this was Emily. This was everything. He dialed Kyle's number. "Dad?" Kyle answered, surprise evident in his voice. Tom rarely called, especially not at 9 in the evening. "Everything okay?" "Kyle," Tom's voice broke. "I found Emily. She's alive." Silence stretched across the line. Then, "I'm coming home. Send me everything you have." 3 days later, Kyle Barrett arrived at his childhood home for the first time in 13 years. He stood in the driveway, military duffel at his feet, staring at the house with a complicated expression. Tom opened the door but couldn't find words. Kyle, now taller than his father, broad-shouldered and carrying himself with military precision, nodded once and picked up his bag. Inside, Rachel showed him the Facebook photos. Kyle studied them silently, his jaw tightening. "That's her," he finally said, looking up at Tom with eyes that matched his sister's. "What's the plan?" They spent the day planning. Kyle, with his military background, approached it like a mission. They needed to gather intelligence, confirm Emily's location, and document everything before confronting Victor Reed. "We can't just storm in," he explained. "If this guy has kept her hidden for 22 years, he's dangerous and calculating. We need to be smarter." That evening, as they finalized preparations to drive to Idaho, Tom's laptop chimed with a notification. A friend request from Victor Reed. Tom froze, then slowly opened Facebook. There was a message attached to the request. "Dad, it's me. Please help." "It could be a trap," Kyle said, peering over his father's shoulder. "What if Reed is using her account?" "Or testing us," Rachel added. "To see if we're really looking for her." Tom shook his head. "No. This is Emily." He couldn't explain how. He knew, a father's intuition perhaps, but the phrasing, the simplicity of it, felt like his daughter. He accepted the friend request and typed quickly, "Emily, it's Dad. Where are you? Are you safe?" The three of them watched the screen, the tiny animation showing someone was typing, then stopping, then typing again. The response, when it finally came, was brief. "He watches everything. Computer in living room. Can only message when he sleeps. Coming to Idaho?" Tom's breath caught. "Yes," he typed. "Kyle and Rachel too. Tell us where exactly." The response took nearly 10 minutes. "Cabin past Riverdale, end of Timber Creek Road. Blue mailbox. He has guns, cameras everywhere. Be careful." Then, "He's moving around upstairs, have to go." The account went offline. "That settles it," Kyle said, straightening up. "We leave for Idaho first thing tomorrow. We'll need to be careful. Surveillance first, then contact local authorities once we're there with proof." Tom nodded, still staring at the screen where his daughter's words had appeared. After 22 years of searching, of hoping against hope, Emily was alive. Emily had reached out. Emily needed help. "We're coming, Em," he whispered to the screen. "Hold on." The next morning, they loaded Tom's old Suburban with supplies for the long drive. Kyle insisted on bringing basic surveillance equipment, binoculars, a digital camera with zoom lens, and handheld radios. Rachel packed her social worker credentials and documentation of Emily's case, hoping they might lend legitimacy to their cause when dealing with local authorities. As Tom locked the front door, he glanced back at the house. For the first time, in 22 years, he felt something other than despair when leaving home. He felt purpose. He felt hope. "Let's bring her home," he said, climbing into the passenger seat as Kyle took the wheel. The journey to Idaho would take nearly 30 hours of continuous driving. They would switch drivers at regular intervals, stopping only for fuel, food, and bathroom breaks. Tom insisted they push through, fear gnawing at him that somehow Victor Reed would discover Emily's message and disappear with her again. In Nebraska, while Kyle slept and Rachel drove, Tom searched every public record he could find on Victor Reed. The man had a thin digital footprint, no criminal record, but also no employment history Tom could locate. His property in Idaho had been purchased, in cash 15 years ago. Before that, records showed he'd lived briefly in Wyoming, Montana, and Washington. "He keeps moving," Tom muttered, staying just long enough to establish a presence, then disappearing again. Rachel glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You think Emily's not the first?" Tom closed his eyes. "I don't know, but someone who manages to keep a kidnapped child hidden for over 2 decades, they've planned carefully." Outside Cheyenne, Tom tried messaging Emily again, but received no response. Kyle, awake now and studying maps of the Idaho location, pointed out that rural internet might be spotty or closely monitored. "What's our plan when we get there?" Rachel asked, the question they'd all been avoiding. "We can't just storm in. We observe first," Kyle said, his voice taking on the crisp tone Tom imagined he used with his military unit. "Learn the routines, identify entry points and security measures." He paused. "And we contact local law enforcement again, with our exact location." Tom frowned. "They already refused to help." "That was over the phone from 2,000 miles away," Kyle countered. "It'll be different when we're there, with proof she's messaging you." As they crossed the Wyoming-Idaho border, a storm rolled in, slowing their progress on the narrow mountain highways. The temperature dropped sharply, and sleet began to hit the windshield. Like everything else in this case, Kyle muttered, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Nothing's going to be easy. By nightfall, exhaustion and deteriorating weather conditions forced them to stop at a motel just outside Twin Falls. They were still hours from Riverdale, but continuing in the dark with icy roads was too dangerous. In their adjoining rooms, none of them slept well. Tom kept checking his phone for messages from Emily, but the screen remained stubbornly empty. The storm knocked out power briefly around 3 a.m., as if to emphasize their vulnerability. Morning brought clearer skies, but a new complication. Victor Reed had posted a new status on Facebook. Thinking of taking a little trip with my girl. Time for a change of scenery. Tom showed it to Kyle and Rachel over breakfast at the motel's small dining area. "He knows," Rachel whispered. "Somehow he knows we're coming." Kyle's face hardened. "Then we don't have much time. We need to get to Riverdale today." Back on the road, they pushed the old Suburban to its limits, racing against an invisible clock. Tom tried calling Emily's account twice, but it went straight to voicemail. By mid-afternoon, they reached the turnoff for Riverdale, a small green sign on a desolate stretch of highway. The town consisted of one main street with essential businesses, a grocery store, gas station, small police outpost, and diner. The surrounding forest pressed in from all sides, dense and watchful. "We should split up," Kyle suggested as they parked in front of the local diner. "I'll go talk to the police, see if they've done that welfare check they promised." "Rachel, can you ask around town, see what people know about Reed? Dad, stay here and keep trying to contact Emily." Tom wanted to protest. He'd waited 22 years to find his daughter, and now they were so close. But Kyle's logic was sound. His hands were shaking too badly to be effective anyway. As Kyle and Rachel headed out on their respective missions, Tom sat in the diner booth, staring at his phone. He sent another message to Emily. "We're in Riverdale, almost there. Hold on." No response came. Outside the diner window, Riverdale continued its sleepy afternoon routine. A few locals glanced curiously at the out-of-state Suburban as they passed. A mail truck made its rounds. The sun began its descent behind the pine-covered mountains. Tom scrolled through the photos of Emily on Victor's profile again, studying every detail for clues. The cabin in the background of one Christmas photo, the forced smile that never reached her eyes, the grip of Victor's hand on her shoulder. "I'm coming, Em," he whispered to the screen. "I promise. This time, I'll bring you home." The bell above the diner door jingled as Kyle returned, his expression grim. He slid into the booth across from Tom. "The police chief says they sent someone out yesterday for a welfare check. According to their report, a woman matching Emily's description told the officer she was fine and there voluntarily." Tom's fist clenched. "That's impossible. She messaged me for help." "I know," Kyle said quietly. "But legally their hands are tied. They won't go back based on our suspicions alone." Rachel returned shortly after, equally discouraged. "No one in town knows much about Reed. He comes in for supplies once every few weeks, keeps to himself. The woman at the grocery store said she's seen his daughter with him occasionally, but never alone." Tom felt despair threatening to overwhelm him again, but pushed it down. They hadn't come this far to give up. "Then we'll have to do this ourselves," he said, his voice steady, despite the fear coursing through him. As night fell over Riverdale, they checked into the Pineview Motel, 6 rooms total, with a flickering vacancy sign. From their room, they could see the road leading out of town and into the dense forest where Victor Reed's property waited. Tom sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at his phone. One last message to Emily. "We're here. We'll find you tomorrow." This time, a response appeared almost immediately. "Please hurry. He knows something's wrong. Says we're leaving soon." Tom showed the message to Kyle and Rachel, his heart racing. Kyle immediately began spreading maps across the bed. "First light tomorrow," he said, his military training evident in his calm efficiency. "We find the property, we document everything, and we bring her home." As they prepared for the most important day of their lives, Tom Barrett finally allowed himself to believe that his 22-year search was about to end. Tomorrow, he would see his daughter again. Tomorrow, Emily would come home. But what really happened that day? The day Emily Barrett disappeared began like any other, August 12, 1995. She remembered the date because she'd written it in her journal that morning, wondering if Justin Taylor would be at the fair that night. He wasn't. Victor Reed was. Emily sat at the small desk in her bedroom, if you could call it that. After 22 years, the space remained Spartan. A twin bed with faded blue sheets, the desk, a dresser with clothes Victor selected, and a bookshelf with titles he approved. No posters, no photographs. Nothing personal except the small notebook she'd hidden beneath a loose floorboard under the bed. Outside her window, the Idaho forest stretched endlessly. A beautiful prison. Through the glass, she could see the security cameras mounted under the eaves, their red lights blinking steadily. Always watching. She closed her eyes, remembering the night that had stolen her life. The county fair. The colors, the sounds, the excitement of being 15 and independent. She'd just passed the photography booth when a man approached. Mid-40s, kind eyes, holding a professional-looking camera. "You like photography?" he'd asked, noticing her point-and-shoot camera. Emily had been cautious, but flattered when he complimented the composition of the shot she was taking of the Ferris wheel. He introduced himself as James, a photography teacher from Chicago. He was judging the art show and happened to notice her taking pictures. "You've got a natural eye," he'd said. "I'm doing a small workshop by the Craft Pavilion in 20 minutes. You should come by." The warning bells had been soft, easily dismissed. He was well-dressed, articulate, and they were in a public place. When she texted Rachel that she was going to a photography workshop instead of meeting at the Ferris wheel, it felt like fate, an opportunity to learn from a professional. The workshop was just him and a large camera bag near the back of the Craft Pavilion. That's when the first real warning flared, but by then he was offering her a soda from a cooler. "Must be thirsty in this heat," he'd said. The soda tasted slightly bitter. Within minutes, her vision blurred. Her last clear memory was his voice no longer kind. "You're mine now." She awoke in darkness, the rumble of a vehicle beneath her, bound, gagged, and stuffed into what she later learned was a hidden compartment in his van. The blue van that had followed her days earlier. By the time she fully regained consciousness, they were hundreds of miles from Mapleton. Victor, no longer. James told her calmly that she belonged to him now, that he'd been watching her for months, that he'd chosen her, that if she tried to escape, he would return to Mapleton and take her brother too. Emily blinked away the memories and focused on the computer screen in front of her. Victor allowed her supervised internet access, another method of control. He would log into his Facebook account and let her post as his daughter, always with him watching, his hand heavy on her shoulder. But yesterday, he'd made a mistake. He'd gone to check on a noise outside, leaving the computer unlocked. In those precious minutes, Emily had searched for her father's name and found him. 22 years older, gray-haired, lined face, but unmistakably her dad. She'd sent the friend request with trembling fingers, added the message, then quickly erased the browser history before Victor returned. Now he was growing suspicious. She'd heard him on the phone earlier, his voice low and urgent. "We need to move again. Yes, immediately. The usual arrangement." Emily knew what that meant. Over 22 years, they'd relocated 3 times, each time following the same pattern. Victor would sense a threat. They would disappear overnight and emerge somewhere new with fresh identities. The first time she'd been 16, then 24, and finally 30, each move crushing her dwindling hope of rescue. She glanced at the window again. Victor had gone to town for supplies, preparing for their escape. It was her only chance to communicate again. She quickly opened the laptop and logged into Facebook. One new message from her father. "We're here. We'll find you tomorrow." Her heart hammered against her ribs as she typed. "Please hurry. He knows something's wrong. Says we're leaving soon." She heard Victor's truck on the gravel driveway and quickly closed the laptop, erasing all evidence of her message. By the time his heavy footsteps reached the porch, she was making dinner in the kitchen, her face a practiced mask of calm submission. "Pack your essentials," he ordered, dropping bags of groceries on the counter. "One bag only. We leave at dawn." "Where are we going?" she asked, careful to keep her voice neutral. Questions often angered him. Victor's eyes narrowed. "Does it matter? You're coming with me, as always." That night, as Victor slept, Emily pulled out her hidden notebook. 22. Years of captivity documented in tiny, cramped handwriting, names of places they'd lived, dates of failed escape attempts, the beatings that followed, the psychological torment of being told repeatedly that her family had stopped looking, had moved on, had forgotten her. She'd tried to escape twice before. The first time she was 17. They were living in Montana then. She'd made it 10 miles on foot before Victor found her. The second time, at 26, she'd managed to reach a police station in Washington state. But Victor had arrived minutes later, photo albums and ID cards in hand, explaining to sympathetic officers that his mentally ill daughter often wandered away and had delusions. Without ID of her own, with Victor's meticulous paper trail establishing their false narrative, and with years of isolation damaging her ability to articulate her situation, Emily had been returned to her captor by those meant to protect her. She tucked the notebook into her pillowcase. When her father came, this would be evidence, proof of what Victor had done. Dawn was approaching. Victor was already loading the truck. Emily placed her single allowed bag by the door, tucked her notebook into the waistband of her jeans at the small of her back, and took one last look at the room that had been her prison for the past 7 years. Through the window, she noticed movement at the edge of the property, a flash of something near the tree line. Her heart stuttered. Was it possible? After all this time? Victor appeared in the doorway. "Time to go." Emily nodded and followed him downstairs, every nerve ending alive with possibility and terror. As they reached the front door, she saw it. Again. Definite movement among the trees. Someone was out there. Victor opened the door, car keys in hand. The moment his back was turned, Emily made her decision. 22 years of calculated submission ended in one defiant moment as she reached for the nearest object, a heavy cast-iron pan from the drying rack, and swung it with all her strength. Tom Barrett had barely slept. As first light filtered through the thin motel curtains, he was already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed staring at the last message from Emily. Kyle had spent half the night studying satellite maps of the area, identifying approaches to Victor Reed's property that would keep them concealed. "We should be able to get within 50 yards through the forest," Kyle explained over hasty cups of coffee. "There's enough cover to observe without being seen." Rachel had contacted a local women's shelter in the nearest city, arranging potential emergency housing if needed. "They're on standby," she confirmed, "and I've prepared a documentation kit. Camera, voice recorder, medical forms." They set out as dawn broke, driving the Suburban to within a mile of the property before continuing on foot through dense pine forest. Kyle led the way, moving with the silent efficiency of his military training. Tom followed, his heart thundering in his chest. After 22 years of searching, his daughter was less than a mile away. They reached the edge of Victor's property just as the sun cleared the mountains. Through a screen of trees, they could see the cabin, larger than Tom had expected, with a main house and 2 outbuildings. Security cameras were mounted at each corner of the structure, and the entire property was surrounded by a high chain-link fence. "There," Kyle whispered, passing Tom the binoculars. Through the lenses, Tom saw movement at an upstairs window, a woman's face, pale and drawn. Emily. His hand trembled so badly he nearly dropped the binoculars. "It's her," he breathed. Rachel squeezed his arm. "We need to call the police now. We have visual confirmation." Kyle nodded, already dialing the Riverdale police on his cell phone. He spoke in hushed, urgent tones, emphasizing that they had located a missing person and had reason to believe she was in danger. While Kyle handled the call, Tom kept the binoculars trained on the house. A blue pickup truck was parked in the driveway, and he could see a man moving back and forth loading items into the vehicle. He's planning to leave, Tom realized with growing panic. Today. Kyle ended his call with a frustrated sigh. They're sending someone, but it could be 30 minutes. We don't have 30 minutes, Tom said, watching as Victor Reed emerged from the house again, carrying what looked like camping gear to the truck. The three exchanged glances, each understanding what might need to happen. Without speaking, Kyle began moving closer to the property line, staying within the cover of trees. Tom and Rachel followed. They watched as Victor returned to the house and, moments later, appeared in the doorway with Emily behind him. From their vantage point, they could see her scanning the tree line, as if sensing their presence. What happened next unfolded with startling speed. As Victor turned to lock the door, Emily's arm swung up suddenly, something heavy in her hand. A dull thud reached them even at this distance. Victor staggered, dropping to one knee. "Now!" Kyle shouted, abandoning stealth as he sprinted toward the fence. Tom ran as he'd never run before, ignoring the burn in his lungs and the protest of his aging knees. Rachel was right behind him, already calling 911 on her phone. Emily stood frozen on the porch, the cast iron pan still in her hand, as Victor struggled to rise. When she heard Kyle shout, her head snapped up, eyes wild with disbelief and hope. "Dad?" Her voice carried across the clearing, small and uncertain. "Emily!" Tom reached the fence, fingers gripping the chain links. "Emily, we're here!" Victor lunged for her ankle, but Emily danced backward, finally breaking free of the paralysis that had gripped her. She bolted down the porch steps toward the fence just as Kyle found the gate and began working on the padlock with a small tool from his pocket. Behind Emily, Victor rose unsteadily to his feet, blood streaming from a gash on his temple. "She's not leaving!" he roared, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a handgun. "Gun!" Kyle shouted, positioning himself between the weapon and his family even as he continued to work on the lock. Time seemed to slow. Tom saw Victor raise the die gun, saw Emily running toward them, her face a mixture of terror and desperate hope, saw the distance between them still too great. The lock gave way under Kyle's hands. He flung the gate open just as a shot cracked across the clearing. Tom felt something sear past his ear, the bullet missing him by inches. Rachel screamed. Kyle shoved Tom aside and charged through the gate toward Victor, ducking as another shot went wide. Emily was halfway to them now, her notebook clutched to her chest, her eyes fixed on her father. In the distance, sirens wailed. The police, finally responding. Victor heard them too, hesitating just long enough for Kyle to close the distance between them. The two men collided with bone-jarring force. Tom reached Emily just as she stumbled, her legs giving out after the surge of adrenaline. He caught her, his arms wrapping around his daughter for the first time in 22 years. "Dad," she sobbed, her fingers digging into his jacket as if afraid he might disappear. "Dad, you found me." "I never stopped looking," Tom whispered into her hair. "Never." Behind them, Kyle and Victor wrestled for control of the gun. Despite his military training, Kyle was struggling. Victor fought with the desperate strength of a man with everything to lose. Rachel rushed to Tom and Emily, helping to move them toward the gate and safety. "The police are almost here," she assured them. A final gunshot exploded across the clearing. Tom turned in horror, still clutching Emily to his side. Kyle and Victor lay motionless on the ground. "Kyle!" Tom's anguished cry tore through the morning air. For one terrible moment, neither man moved. Then Kyle stirred, pushing himself up with a groan. Victor remained still, the gun now in Kyle's hand. "I'm okay," Kyle called, his voice ragged. "He's down, not dead. Unconscious." Police cars screeched into the clearing, officers emerging with weapons drawn. Everything blurred into chaos, shouted commands, medical personnel arriving, statements being taken. Through it all, Tom refused to let go of Emily, and she clung to him with equal determination. As paramedics examined Emily, she pressed her notebook into Tom's hands. "Everything's in here," she said, her voice stronger now. 22 years, all of it, The evidence in that small notebook, along with the security camera footage from Victor's own system showing years of Emily's captivity, would be more than enough to ensure he never saw freedom again. As Emily was guided toward an ambulance, she looked back at the cabin that had been her prison. "He told me you'd stopped looking," she said to Tom, her voice breaking, "that you'd forgotten me." Tom shook his head, tears flowing freely. "Not a single day, Em. Not one day did I stop searching for you." Emily's face crumpled, decades of forced composure finally giving way. "Take me home, Dad." The story broke nationally 2 days later. "Kidnapped teen found after 22 years," splashed across headlines. Media trucks lined the street outside the hospital where Emily was recovering. Reporters ambushed Tom, Kyle, and Rachel whenever they appeared. Inside the hospital, sheltered from the chaos, Emily Barrett began the long process of reclaiming her life. Physical examinations revealed old injuries consistent with her account of abuse. Psychological evaluations documented the complex trauma she had endured. Dr. Abigail Wilson, a specialist in long-term captivity cases, described it as one of the worst cases of extended psychological imprisonment I've encountered since Elizabeth Fritzl. Victor Reed was charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, assault, and dozens of other crimes. His digital footprint, now thoroughly investigated, suggested Emily hadn't been his first victim. Police found evidence linking him to at least 2 other disappeared girls in the 1980s, though those cases remained unsolved. For Emily, the outside world was overwhelming, too bright, too loud, too fast. She startled at sudden movements, flinched when doors closed. The hospital provided a transitional room, a space between captivity and freedom, where she could begin to heal. "It's like learning to breathe underwater," she explained to her father one afternoon, her voice soft but steady. "Everything I knew about surviving doesn't work here." Tom visited daily, bringing small pieces of her former life, her childhood, teddy bear, preserved in her untouched bedroom, photographs of family vacations, her first camera, still in its case. Each item sparked both recognition and grief for the years lost. Kyle took leave from the military, renting an apartment near the hospital. His presence, solid, protective, but never overwhelming, became Emily's anchor. The 9-year-old brother she'd left behind was now a 31-year-old man, yet somehow their connection remained unbroken. "I used to imagine what you'd be like when you grew up," Emily told him one evening as they shared takeout in her room. "I was pretty close, actually." Kyle's smile held sadness. "I used to talk to you every night before bed. Dad caught me once, thought I was going crazy." "You weren't," Emily said simply. "I heard you." 3 months after her rescue, Emily moved into a halfway house for trauma survivors. The structure offered both independence and support, private living space with round-the-clock counselors available. She began the painstaking process of building a life. Kyle visited daily, often bringing his camera. Photography, once Emily's passion, then twisted into a tool of her captor's control, slowly became hers again. At first she couldn't touch a camera without trembling. Kyle would set it on a table between them, never pushing, just waiting. 6 months after her rescue, she picked it up. Her first photo was of a sparrow on the halfway house feeder, wings blurred in motion, capturing freedom. Meanwhile, Rachel channeled her social work experience into documenting Emily's story. With Emily's consent and collaboration, she began writing, "Still Here, A Captive's Voice." The process was therapeutic for Emily, reclaiming her narrative from the man who had stolen it. "I don't want to be just a victim," Emily explained during one of their sessions. "I lived through it. I survived it. That makes me more than what he did to me." The hardest reunion came 10 months after her rescue, when Lisa Barrett, now Lisa Winters, flew in from Florida. The woman who had once been her mother was now a stranger, remarried with stepchildren, her life rebuilt from the ashes of loss. They met in the garden of the halfway house, 2 women connected by blood and separated by time. Lisa's hands trembled as she reached for her daughter. "Emily," she whispered, "my beautiful girl." The embrace was awkward, tentative, neither woman quite fitting into the memory the other held. But it was a beginning. By the spring of 2019, Emily was ready for Victor Reed's trial. She insisted on testifying, despite her therapist's concerns about the trauma of facing her captor again. "I spent 22 years being silenced," Emily said firmly. "He doesn't get to silence me now." The courtroom fell hushed as Emily took the stand. Victor Reed sat at the defense table, diminished without his power, yet still radiating menace. Emily did not look at him. Instead, she looked at her father, her brother, and Rachel, the people who had never stopped believing she would come home. For 4 hours, she testified, her voice unwavering as she detailed her captivity. The notebook she had kept became state's evidence, 22 years of hidden resistance documented in her own hand. When the defense attorney suggested she might have stayed willingly, Emily finally turned to face Victor directly. "He told me. My family had forgotten me," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "That was his cruelest lie. My father never stopped looking. Not for one day." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Victor Reed was sentenced to 150 years without possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. Emily, flanked by her family, stepped up to the microphones. "Today isn't about him," she said. "It's about every person who's still waiting to be found. It's never too late to come home." 1 year after her rescue, Emily moved into her own apartment, a small, sun-filled space overlooking a park. She began volunteering at a youth photography program, teaching children to see beauty in the world around them. The darkness would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her days. Tom finally took down the maps and clippings in his obsession room. He opened the windows, letting fresh air sweep away 2 decades of desperate searching. The space became a guest room for when Emily visited, which she did often, still rebuilding the relationship that had been severed at 15. Kyle returned to active duty but requested a transfer to a base within driving distance. He brought his wife and son to meet Emily, expanding her circle of family one careful introduction at a time. Lisa and Emily established a cautious friendship, not quite mother and daughter anymore, but connected by shared love and loss. On the 2nd anniversary of her rescue, Emily suggested a family photograph. They gathered in Tom's backyard. Tom, Kyle with his family, Lisa with her husband Rachel, and Emily at the center. As the camera timer counted down, Emily looked at the faces surrounding her, each representing a different piece of her journey, home. The photograph captured what words could not: a family fractured by tragedy, rebuilt through resilience, different than it would have been, but whole in its own way. Emily Barrett had returned from the darkness, carrying its shadows but no longer imprisoned by them. When asked in her final television interview what message she had for others still searching, Emily's answer was simple: keep looking, keep hoping. The journey home might be longer than you imagined, but some lights never go out. What would you sacrifice for someone you love, and how long would you keep searching when everyone tells you to stop? If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share for more stories of survival and the unbreakable bonds of family.